Thanks everyone for reading that short message there. I want to say hi and thanks for tuning in. I'm so excited to share this information with my family and all my dear cousins who will be watching it. After visiting Latvia myself, I felt really grounded in my roots, and so much so that I couldn't wait to share all that I discovered. There is no way I could possibly complete a full and exhaustive reflective of our ancestors, but I diligently collected and systemized whatever information I got, and with much help from the experts in Latvia and online, I was able to trace our family roots all the way back to the early 1700s. They were part of a Jewish community in and outside of Labau in Latvia in the Goldingen region. But then, after reading all of the family memoirs people shared with me, I found lots of clues and some slip-ups. So I had to work them in with the official documents I got from places like the Latvian State Archives and have some things translated from Russian, into English to make better sense of them. I must say at the end of the day, everything we have here just poses more questions than answers. And then the answers we got just led to more questions. But more on that later, because you'll see some special surprises in store in the two videos. But first up for now, let's have a look at the geographical situation the family was in when they left for America in 1906. The Baltic states. We have Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And you can see how close they are to Russia. And we're in the Baltic Sea. So on this trip, one of the first things that I found that was amazing was that Abraham Schnitt had immigrated once before. He actually came from Lithuania. The town back then was called Novo Alexandrovsk, and he would have immigrated to Labau, some 400 kilometers, back in 1886 when he was 26 years old. I want to especially point out Riga, too, the capital of Latvia and a very important Baltic seaport. Now, at Yetta was a Schwartz, and that family was born in Hasenpfahl in the Azpute region. I also want to say that, especially about Labau, that it was called the city where the wind was born, probably because of the constant sea breeze from the Baltic Sea. And early in the 20th century, that same port became a central point of embarkation for immigrants traveling to the United States, like our family. In fact, by 1906, the direct ship service to the United States was used by over 40,000 migrants a year. Now, comparing this city to Paris, London, or New York, of course, Labau seemed like just a small provincial town, but actually, it is a very beautiful city. There are lots of parks between the town and the sea, miles and miles of clean white beaches, and the stone amber has been found there for millions and millions of years. In fact, in Labau, they have just built recently a beautiful opera and arts theater made out of amber. I want to say that after reading some memoirs from our own family here in the United States, that they say the Jewish people there lived with their Gentile neighbors in relative peace and that young people had a good life. It was said that some would have had bicycles, none would have had a camera, and games like tennis were definitely for the rich or the rich tourists. But I want to just reflect back on Ron and Bruce Abel's memoirs because they say that they can imagine and reminisce about when our family was actually boarding their ship for America. And I'm going to quote them. They said, "Our family boarded the ship. Perhaps they were herded into steerage, but perhaps it's a fact that they never saw the ship sail away from port because they were in steerage. But we want to freeze for a moment of time and give ourselves the luxury of seeing the Schnitz lined up on the deck of that ship, the name of which we've never really known. And here the family is as they set off in all their apprehension, confusion, and certainly excitement as they were going to the new world. All of them, Abraham, Yetta, Edie, Izzy, Nathan, Etta, Dave, and newborn Anne. I really liked that analogy when I was reading it from Ron and Bruce's memoirs, but I'm really excited to tell them, and I think Ron would be excited to know, that we now know the name of that ship. It was the RMS Umbria. Here's another map. This one is older because it shows the Courland region of Libau and Lithuania. I just want to highlight again, as you get used to the geography, we can see Libau over here on this port side. Again, the capital of Latvia is Riga. But as we come down into here, this borderline here is closer to Lithuania. So we know that our ancestors always said they came from Libau, Russia. In fact, on all the documents from the ship's manifest and all the documents they signed all the way up to their naturalization papers in Los Angeles, they would say they came from Libau, Russia. But it turns out that they were Courlander German Jews. And this Courland area was a historically distinct area of modern-day Latvia, bound by the Baltic Sea to the west, Lithuania to the south, and the Dvina River to the north. Its geographical position, it's lying at the crossroads where east meets west, and its ice-free Baltic ports, especially Libau, gave it a commercial and strategic importance far greater than its geographical area. At its height, Courland was a prosperous, cultured, German-speaking duchy, proudly and proud of its traditions and history. Courland was known as a separate province of the Russian Empire from 1797 all the way till 1918. The Jewish population, like our family of Courland, played a vital part in the creation of the wealth of Courland and in a really rich cultural life of the area. In fact, Jewish families like ours with Courland origins can be found all over the world. Just to note, one of the reasons our ancestors always called themselves Russian was because of the Nazi-Soviet Pact of 1939, when the Baltic countries were still considered a part of Russia. I want to say that nonetheless, before viewing the second family-friendly video, I wanted to familiarize everyone with what happened specifically in Libau and in Latvia and in the Courland region during World War II. So first off, we just want to say that the positive contribution of the Jewish community to the swift development of industry and trade in Latvia in the late 19th century cannot be overestimated. The biggest woodworking factories, the majority of timber and grain trading, large flax mills, flax export companies, and distillery businesses were concentrated in the hands of Jewish business people, and the Jewish people owned 10 banks in Riga already by this time, all of which, unfortunately, set the stage for jealousy and for the Holocaust of 1941. Before World War II, the census of 1935 in Latvia identified about 93,000 Jews living in the state. Now, approximately 70,000 Jews were killed in the Holocaust in the Baltics. For us in Libau, the worst atrocities occurred between the 15th and 17th of December in 1941, where almost 3,000 Jews were massacred over just a couple of days. During this time, Jewish families were completely destroyed because most of those killed were women and children. They say the killing began with Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 as an invasion of Russia. You can read a great deal of what happened in the Riga ghetto first before they got down to Libau. I actually didn't go to Riga because I found that Libau was a good 3 or 4 hours drive from Riga, and with the limited time I had, I wanted it to spend right where our relatives and ancestors lived and worked. So I did want to say, though, it ended up that we were Courlander German Jews who spoke German in the home. But during this time, what happened is the Nazis were creating special task force within the SS called the Einsatzgruppen, A, B, C, and D. A is the group that came and tried to eliminate the Jewish people in Latvia. They were made up of thousands, 5,000 or more men, killing squads under the command of Reinhard Heydrich. And this was in Latvia. It was the Nazi Himmler who appoints him to oversee the Einsatzgruppen A in Latvia. And Heydrich also ends up directly responsible for murdering over 2 million people himself. Just to say a little bit more about Heydrich. He was schooled in street fighting and terrorism in Germany. He then worked so devotedly for the Nazi Party that when Hitler came to power, he put him in charge of the Dachau concentration camp. Now, Dachau was only an hour north of where Alan and I were living for 2 months in Germany, and he went and did a tour of Dachau. I didn't feel that I could handle it myself, and it was a tough day, but he's really glad he went. In 1934, just talking about Heydrich, he headed the Berlin Gestapo. He ended up chief of the criminal police, the security service, and the main Gestapo. And by 1938, he was the one that concocted the idea of the Einsatzgruppen, whose business it was to murder Jews. I can say that reading a little bit more about him, thankfully, he was assassinated in 1942. You know, Heydrich was one of the darkest figures within the Nazi elite, and Hitler described him as the man with the iron heart. He was so evil. And under his command, by mid-December 1941, in the area where our families lived, thousands of Jewish people were killed. In fact, there was about 7,000 Jewish people living in the Lvov region, and over 6,000 of them were killed at the end of that part of the Holocaust, and only 7 Jewish families survived. So when I got to Lvov, and I'm going to start calling it Leopai, I should. When I got to Leopai, I found that the Jewish communities had been so completely decimated, there really wasn't very many Jewish people left anywhere in the Baltics anymore because of the Holocaust. But just outside of Lvov is a beach called Shedki Beach. And this is where the Nazis took the Jewish people there to be massacred. Now, I went to Shedki Beach, and I'll be able to show you some photographs. It was a former military training ground just minutes out of the city. Jewish men that had been captured to work in work camps were forced to dig the ditches, while the Jewish women and children were forced to strip off their clothes and assemble in groups of 10 to be shot by machine gun fire. Today, Shedki Beach is home to a very famous Jewish Holocaust monument in the shape of a menorah, and I'm going to be able to show you more about that. Here you can have a look at what the memorial looks like from the air. It is actually in the shape of a menorah facing out to the Baltic Sea. Here you'll be surprised to see a side view of it. Now, it's built from stones and columns made out of stones. You'll see the forest off to the other side, and off to the left would be the shoreline. Forests were also important to the Nazis because they would also exterminate Jews by shooting them in forests. But I want to tell you a little bit more about the memorial. And here you can see the brick columns up close. You'll also see that it was freezing there, and it was only in October. So you can imagine what it would have been like in December for the Jewish families. There was actually would have been ice on the sand. So you can see that the rock and stone columns are almost as tall as I am in this slide here. Now the following slides are going to depict actual scenes from the Shedkey Beach massacre from the 15th to the 17th of December in 1941. I apologize in advance for the disturbing images, but they have a story to tell. I've definitely let them be left out of the second video, where I focused entirely on our family roots. I want to say that this final clipping here was from the Jewish Museum in Leopold, and it's a small museum. I was in there and I've taken this photograph there of the executions at Shedkey Beach. And you could have seen from the photos that it was all very tragic. It was very cold, and you're going to notice as well that the men have square patches on them, the Jewish men. They generally weren't killed this way. They were taken to war camps until they could no longer work in the labor camps, and they were also forced to dig the ditches where the women and children were killed. It was just so horrific, especially for our family, which you'll find in the second video are represented here. I've got 3 videos, short videos for you to watch next. One that was taken live from a journalist in Libau at the time. It says that it was recorded by a Nazi soldier, and it wasn't, although they did record all of their atrocities. And then the second 2, he was actually asked many years later in 1981 to testify to the truth of the Holocaust, because you know about the deniers of the Holocaust. So I wanted to include them, part 1 and part 2. So they'll come up next, and they only go for a few minutes. This first video that we've got is from Reinhard Weiner, a German photographer who filmed the killing of the Jewish people in Libau at Shedkey Beach in December 1941. next video is part 1 of Reinhard Weiner, who had to testify to the truth of the massacres at Shedkey Beach. The video is quite short, just a couple of minutes, but if you ever Google it, it's a little longer, these videos online. It's very interesting, and they're very old videos from 1981, so the quality is not that good, and you'll have to read the subtitles, but shows you and tells you a great deal about what happened in Leopai.
Ich bin allerdings die Strecke von Memel nach Riga bin ich mit dem Auto gefahren. Ja. Jetzt zur Szene selbst. Ich sagte schon, dass ich im Ende Juli, August nach Liebau kam und wie ich dann in die Anlagen kam, das kleine Wäldchen, oder es war ein kleines Wäldchen vom Strand, und wo uns der Soldat entgegenkam. Wir gingen dann weiter bis zu der Exekutionsstelle. Dort waren ringsherum deutsche Soldaten als Zuschauer. Dann in der Mitte war ein langer Graben gezogen, wie wir es auch im Film sehen werden. Und zunächst, ich stellte mich dann hin in der zweiten Reihe von den Soldaten auf, in einem Abstand von etwa 50 Metern vom Graben entfernt. Und wartete nun, was geschieht. Es dauerte gar nicht lange, kam ein Lastwagen angefahren, ein Pritschenwagen mit Menschen drauf. Ich wusste aber nicht, wie viel, und habe sie auch anfangs nicht gesehen, weil sie gelegen haben. Und an allen 4 Ecken dieser Pritsche standen Zivilisten mit gelben Armbinden und einem mit Gewehr. Und die sprangen gleich, nachdem der Wagen bei uns anhielt, von dem Wagen herunter, machten keine Klappe runter, sondern haben da irgendetwas gerufen, was ich nicht verstand. Und daraufhin sprangen nachher die Menschen auf, und ich sah, dass sie gelbe Flicken vorn und hinten und auf dem Rücken, auf der Brust und auf dem Rücken hatten.
This is the second part of his testimony about the massacre at Shedkey Beach. This one also is just a couple minutes long. It will have subtitles, and the quality is also a little bit poor. Sorry.
Sie kamen auf ein.
I think that those videos paint a picture for you of exactly what happened to our ancestors who were left behind. And that's why I wanted to share them with you. They're short, but they tell a good, well, not a good story, but the story. You can imagine how bizarre it was for me to be standing on that same beach some 76 years later. You know, for me, it was already bitter cold in October at Shedkey Beach. And I can imagine how freezing it would have been in December for those beautiful women and children. The area is only minutes from downtown Leapai. And of course, we were taken there by our local historians. I dreamed that those beautiful women, once they were naked, they had to strip their clothes because the Nazis wanted their clothes. And they would have been so cold and humiliated to be naked that they wanted to die, if that's any solace. There was an odd situation when we arrived at the memorial. It was so freezing and windy, and Alan stayed up with the tour guides, and I walked straight down to the beach. I didn't know the whole story like you guys know now from the videos just then, but I was drawn to walk down to the beach to where the Baltic Sea, small waves there as you can see. And when I got down there, I looked at the sand, and there was just a myriad of these gorgeous little stones, maybe the size of a quarter or a 50-cent piece. And they were in a lot of colors like black, gray, white, beige, quite shiny. And I just looked around and I said out loud or to myself, "Hello, ladies." Wasn't quite sure why. At that point, I reached down and I picked up this really beautiful gray stone in the shape of a love heart with a little imperfection. I cleaned it on my jeans, kissed it, and put it in my pocket. I still have the stone today. I keep it next to my bed. I'm prone to collecting stones on my travels normally, but I don't know why I said hello, ladies, although it makes a lot more sense now. The other really odd thing that happened was that night I had a terrible headache, worse than any migraine, and I had never had a headache like that before. So I thought I might not be able to go on my next day's tour, which was really important. And I was telling the tour guides about it the next day, that I was glad I was fine and got to go on the tour. And they said, actually, a really bad headache is a physiological ill side effect that tourists get after visiting Shedkey Beach. I was not the only one that complained of that to them. So that was really strange. But it was, you know, very emotional, overwhelming sort of a place now that you know what's gone on there in the past. Just moving along through this video to the next part, I'm reflecting back on being in the Jewish cemetery in Leapai because we actually had to be there twice. This is the Holocaust memorial that's in the cemetery. Behind us is the Jewish cemetery. On the other side of the cemetery is a Lutheran, Catholic, and Russian Orthodox part of the cemetery. Ours is a bit rack and ruin due to the war. The other side was extremely well kept. But I wanted you to know that my goal was to investigate from 1906 backwards. And I was pretty much hoping to steer clear of too much of the Holocaust era, but there was no escaping it. As you can see, it was impossible. And I'm in no way a war historian and could never cover the Holocaust concisely or academically, but I learned a lot more about how it affected our family in Latvia and in which terrible ways, and that's what I've shown you today, obviously. The second video, I promise, does not include any more graphic images. So if you don't mind a little bit more about Hitler's relationship to what happened to us in Latvia, we were living in Bulgaria recently, and we did a historical tour to his home at Eagle's Nest and his headquarters and the bunkers in the Bulgarian Alps in Berchtesgaden. It was really interesting and sobering, especially after just being in Latvia on this tour, but I'm glad I went. And here are some photos of Eagle's Nest, a little bit about Berchtesgaden in case you don't get there one day. It's about a half hour out of Salzburg in Austria. On our tour, you walk through this main bunker that Hitler built. This is original. This particular bunker is heated because he didn't like the moss or the cold when he was coming in. He also built a special purpose luxury elevator to take dignitaries up to the top of Eagle's Nest where he had a tea house. The elevator is a historic survivor of the Third Reich and can only be reached by taking a bus, like a tour bus, or walking on a strenuous 2-hour hike up to the elevator shaft, which is set deep inside this mountain. This is the elevator from the inside of what it looked like when Hitler had it. You can see that it had plush velvet seating. Today, all those benches have been removed because they crowd in tourists into the elevator. It's still working. It has been retrofitted, the mechanisms, but it is still the same elevator. It's gold and very opulent, but it's also very crowded and very overwhelming. Tourists often say that every part of the experience at Eagles Martin is like a cattle call. I did ask the tour guides if they ever had any Nazi sympathizers on their tours. It wouldn't seem common, but they said there's always one or two and they can always tell which one they are on the bus. Nonetheless, this was a very somber day, but it was very interesting. With views like this, it's hard to think about how someone could be so evil when they were so privileged. But once at the top, you can explore most of the rooms of Eagle's Nest. Now, it's a restaurant now, and so people were having something to eat. It was the same spot that Hitler, Eva Braun, Himmler, and the rest of the Nazis had their banquets and entertained foreign diplomats. On a clear day, you can see Salzburg, and even when it's misty and the swirling clouds give it a pleasantly eerie feeling, but in reality, Hitler only went up to the top 13 times. It was too much of a schlep to go up, so he lived down below, his house was, and this was used just to show off. This is how Eagle's Nest looks today with the tourist either hiking up or taking the tour buses up and the elevator, and that's the view that you see from up there as well. This particular slide just shows where you get onto the elevator and how it's set so deeply inside the mountain and how far it goes up, 124 meters. Now, interesting, down the bottom of the mountain, just a couple of facts. It was 17 years in the making, this Eagle's Nest, and its 6.5 kilometers of underground bunkers and houses. 17 years, it still wasn't completed yet when Hitler committed suicide. He had work gangs working on the mountain year-round, every day, large groups of Italians, Austrians, Czechoslovakians. I might have asked a really stupid question. Was there any Jewish people working on the structures? And of course not. He used to build camps for the workers, and he would provide brothels for the groups of men, all except for the German workers. But this hotel down the bottom, when Hitler arrived, he wanted that hotel, and the owner said, no, this is my hotel, so he promptly incarcerated him and took it over anyways, and he used it for officers of the SS. If you look on the bottom right hand of the screen, you'll see a guard's stone booth, and that's the original guardsman's booth for Hitler's property. We walked around the corner there, and you go up the driveway to actually Hitler's house. Now, what happened when we were there was they were upgrading the documentation center and the infrastructure because they get so many tourists that the only bunkers that our group could visit on that day, we were on a tour bus with 40 people, I'd say, were actually the ones underneath this bunker that lead across that road into Bormann's house and back behind to Hitler's house. As I was saying, there's 6.5 miles of bunkers in the mountain. If you tried to recreate and rebuild bunkers today, it would cost you over 100 million euro. And people do stay in that hotel for holidays, believe it or not, the Grand Turkin Hotel. This is a closer look at the guards booth there. We walked around that corner. When we started to walk up his driveway, his actual driveway, I was starting to feel pretty sick by then, but luckily the house is in complete rubble and all you can see of the house is some retaining walls. When the Americans came in 1945, they wanted to make sure, like I was saying, that none of this was ever turned into a memorial or a monument or a shrine to Hitler. They stayed for 7 years till 1952. They bombed his house and they decided that they could trust the Germans again, so they gave the land back to the Germans. And it's more like a national park than anything else. This slide here shows you the house as it is today and when it was bombed. As I said, we got just to the bottom of it there, but we couldn't see it from this angle. It had stunning views all around. I can show you a little bit about the bunkers that we went in. This one here, just underneath the Grand Turkin Hotel, it was a really warm day outside, but the bunkers were so cold, just freezing, wet, dank. This one here is actually Hitler's bedroom and bathroom. As you turned each corner, there would be squares cut out of the block walls, the concrete walls, maybe 6 inches by 6 inches, pointing in all directions. They were for to hold machine guns so that they could kill you from any angle if you were coming into the bunkers uninvited. This is a fair shot of what the bunkers look like now. And none of them are heated, just that entrance one. This is an actual photo of me in one of the bunkers. Alan took it. It is not photoshopped or fixed in any way. It just came out this way. It's so eerie. It was an eerie, freezing, cold, hate-filled place, and you really couldn't shake the feeling of dread from being there. And we're pretty happy to leave at the end of the day and never have to hear the word Hitler spoken again. Or, of course, the phenomenon of Eva Braun. She was actually a permanent resident up at Eagle's Nest, and she lived up there for 14 years. Hitler wasn't there as often as her, but they certainly had their bunkers in Berlin where they committed suicide, and they didn't die here. So this chapter and part of the video is Alana Ivanova runs an organization that helped me very much in Libau, and she says, our generation is the one closest to those who survived the Holocaust, and we are the heirs of our Jewish family memory, miseries, and history. Therefore, it's our generation's duty to keep the pages open and find hidden narratives that give meaning to their lives and ours. I want to say about her foundation, the Open Public Foundation Leapai Jewish Heritage is in a building behind the Jewish Museum right in Leapai where I was. I had a meeting with her in her office, And again, most beautiful Jewish lady. She helped me with so much. You'll see in the second video. Couldn't have done it without her, of course. The organization was established in 2004 during the reunion of Latvian Jews in 2004. They also dedicated the memorial wall in the cemetery, which I showed you. I was there with Alan. I was actually in the cemetery twice for two different reasons. In the cemetery, that wall has a list of 7,600 Liepai Lebau Jews who perished during 1941 to 1945 in the Holocaust. Now, the primary goal of the foundation was to create the memorial in Shedki at Shedki Beach, where I took you via the photos and the films. The other objectives of the foundation are the publication of materials about Liepai and its Jewish history, support for educational programs for Jewish children, including social programs, the organization of Jewish festivals and gatherings, the creation of a database with reminiscence of survivors and righteous among the nations, and the preservation and development of connections with the Jewish expatriates of Liepai and their descendants, like us, we're the descendants. I must say, in July next year, in 2018, from the 2nd to the 5th, they're having a 100-year celebration of Latvian Jewry, and they've asked me if I'm coming back. I know that I can't make it, but I highly recommend if anybody can. It is incredibly interesting to go there. It was safe and an incredibly moving experience with a great deal of meaning. A poem came across my desk through the memoirs that said, "We may be miles apart, but you'll always be in my heart. No one can separate the deep love we have for each other, not time nor distance, nor fair or foul weather. Many a time my tears fall fast thinking of you and the days that have passed, longing to hold your dear faces again, for only in this way can our hearts truly mend." Please feel free to contact me anytime and email me any information you can help add to our family's history, and all of the feedback that you can. That would be wonderful. This is the end of the first part of the presentation. I just wanted to say here also that at the end of the day, it turns out here what I've done is not unusual at all for Jewish descendants, and they come from all over the world to Latvia. And you'll see some of that in the second video as well. In the second video, I'll also be able to introduce you to all the wonderful people that helped make this trip possible and would always help you if you needed anything. So again, I look forward to your feedback and if you have any other stories that we can add. Thank you all.